Let's get started. So if you haven't had the chance to meet me yet, I'm Matt Kloppenstein. I'm the Assistant Director of National Fellowships, and I work with graduate students who are applying for funding from outside the university. And I'm happy to spend a little time with you helping think about ways of approaching writing a fellowship proposal. So this session isn't tailored to any one particular opportunity. It's really meant to think big picture about the features of a fellowship proposal and about what work it's doing in the context of the overall argument you're trying to make for your application. And we'll look at several examples from a range of different awards to hopefully illustrate some of these points here. But my goal is to help get some things for you that you will be able to hopefully apply and translate to different types of applications here. All right. And so just as a quick overview of where we're going with all of this, we are going to be focusing on really trying to understand the purpose behind the different parts of a fellowship proposal and the logic that is playing within the overall application that you're going to be writing here. So thinking about the conceptual geometry, I'd like to call it here, thinking about how to establish significance and then connect that with every feature of the proposal that you're working on here. And then try to bring in a few examples at certain points to help illustrate ways in which different people for different opportunities have approached this here. And so I recognize we probably have a range of different programs and fields that are represented. Again, the focus here is humanities and certain social science disciplines. Did a session last week on STEM disciplines. And so if that's your field, some of this will translate to that, but I'm happy to share materials for that session as well, because there are some things that are going to be a little bit different depending on the type of field that you're in here. But big picture, my goal is to try to help us get to the point of having some sense of a game plan for going into writing this, because writing fellowships can be a little bit nerve-wracking sometimes, and I think we can vacillate between these two extremes here, between total paralysis about where to even begin, or just kind of blind panic about hoping something is going to emerge from furious writing here. And so I'm hoping that by being able to identify the key features of a successful proposal and thinking about the role that it's trying to play there, that you will be able to start in a better position than one of these sort of extremes here. I do just want to note that the focus here is not on any one particular funding opportunity, and it's not on how to find the opportunities that you might be eligible for here. I've done other sessions on that, and I'm happy to talk with anyone individually who's looking for particular things to apply for. I'll just flag a couple of databases that can be of use if you are looking for an opportunity to apply for, if you're not sure, how you want to translate some of the things that we're thinking about in today's session. You can click on any of these links here. Again, I'll share these slides, and you can investigate based on a variety of criteria and search by a number of different categories that will help you hopefully find some options that might be available here. So again, not our focus, but I'm happy to talk with anyone individually about what options might be available for their particular situation, and encourage you to spend a little bit of time using these resources if you're trying to figure out something that you'd like to apply for at some point. So the first half of our time here, I want to focus on some bigger picture things around writing proposals, just trying to think in general about what the large goal that we're trying to accomplish is here. Spend a little bit of time thinking about typical formats and some things to keep in mind related to that. And then again, thinking about big picture logical relationships and about the larger questions that are motivating the projects that you're working on, that will be motivating the application that you're going to end up writing here. And in the second half, we will break down specific features of research proposal and try to make that a little bit more specific, a little bit more concrete about how that's going to be played out in the context of different types of applications here. But I want to start big picture with some general observations that are important to keep in mind because proposals represent their own particular type of academic writing, certainly related to things that you've probably done in terms of maybe seminar papers or journal manuscripts or prospecti for dissertations, things like that. But they also have some distinct features. And depending on your discipline, they may be a little bit further away than what the norm is, depending on what those conventions look like here. Two things to note about it. One, this is something that's future oriented. This is about work that you are proposing to do. So this is a little different than when you're summarizing work that you've already done or presenting your findings. This is about making a case for something that you think should be done based on maybe some preliminary data or based on work that other scholars have done that suggested it's a promising avenue to explore here. But that means that there is going to be that future-oriented quality to it here. You're not just claiming that, this is what we're going to find, or the argument demonstrates this, because there's still research that needs to be done to support that. This is probably a little bit less unusual especially for people in humanities disciplines, but for people who are more on the science side of the social sciences there, proposal writing is oftentimes a first-person genre here, because these types of opportunities are about investing in you and about demonstrating your preparation qualifications for a particular project. And so in some disciplines, it's more the case that you're writing in third person or writing in passive constructions because the focus is more on the research there. But in the context of a proposal for an individual fellowship, it's really trying to show your preparation and trying to show how you're going to make a contribution here. And so that does mean that you're likely to use more first-person writing, because it's important to show what you know, what you're capable of, your skills, your ideas here. And then a point that I'll be making in various ways throughout our session is that proposals are arguments. Every aspect of it is. We're focusing here on the research proposal itself, but there may be other documents that you're submitting for a fellowship proposal. There could be a personal statement, there might be a budget, transcripts, letters of recommendation. I encourage you to think of each one of those pieces as evidence that's building this larger argument about why you should receive whatever the opportunity is. And that means that should be informing some of the rhetorical moves you're going to make. That should be informing the type of content that you're going to bring in there. Think about how is this, this piece of information that I'm including going to help a reviewer ultimately make a decision, and hopefully a favorable one for all of you here. And in the context of a research proposal, the goal is really to show that the research that you're proposing is something that's a good fit for the funder, that is feasible, and that's going to make a significant contribution to the field that you're in, and also to the goal of whatever the opportunity is here as well. And so with that in mind, it's important to adopt what the psychologist Betty Lai calls a grants mindset that I think is really helpful. And I would recommend her book, The Grant Writing Guide, A Roadmap for Scholars. I've drawn on this and a number of other resources that I've flagged at the end in putting together this presentation here. But I think this is a useful way of thinking about how, in some cases, you might need to make a little bit of a mindset shift from how you might approach other types of writing to make sure that you're developing that larger argument. And she frames it in this useful way of thinking about how to change from making statements to giving guidance. Because this isn't just you sort of neutrally reporting on data that's been collected or things that have been shown in the literature here. It's you trying to make a case about where research should be going here. And so that means that there should be some momentum to your writing. That it's not just here's something that's been done. It's this is what needs to be done. This is why this is important. This is why I'm the right person for this sort of opportunity here. And so that does mean a little bit of a mindset shift in some cases from your own thinking perhaps about your work. I know as grad students, it's oftentimes the case that we're in a space of constant criticism. There's a lot of critique that goes on. There's a lot of thinking about weaknesses and arguments, and that can in some cases mean that it's harder to adopt that expert point of view. But when you're proposing research, when you're developing your dissertation project, you're really the expert here. You're suggesting that this is a new area for knowledge creation. And so I'm encouraging you to lean into that, to try to embrace that authority of a scholar in training here, and recognize that you are really trying to make the case for why something is important here. So you want to adopt that sort of tone of appropriate confidence. And that means that you are, again, embracing the sense that you have the ability to provide some sense of direction about where things should be going in the field that you're part of here. And as I mentioned before, this means that this is future oriented. This is about where research should be going here. It means that you are evaluating evidence. You're drawing some conclusions. You're suggesting that there are implications, again, about where things should be going. And that all of this has some momentum here. And that is something that can be reflected even in the level of individual sentences, where you're suggesting particular steps here, rather than just saying, here's some information, as if the implications of that are going to be self-evident here. So that grants mindset is something that I'll refer to throughout here. And I think that this applies really to any discipline. And it's a key way that that this type of writing is distinguished from other types of academic writing that you are, I'm sure, engaged in. So again, as we're thinking about some of these big picture issues here, as we're clarifying the purpose of what's going on when you're working on a research proposal, there's some basic questions that a proposal is going to need to answer. And regardless of the format, regardless of the requirements, regardless of the length or whatever the case might be for a funder, reviewers are going to want to be able to know the answers to these basic questions here, and they should be able to find it somewhere in the proposal if this is about research here. They want to know what's new. What's the contribution in terms of new knowledge here? What are we going to learn that we don't know now as a result of you carrying out whatever activities you're proposing here? But not just why is it new, but why do we need to know it's here? Just because someone's never studied something, that is not necessarily an intellectually sufficient reason for that. You know, the I'm filling a gap response can always lead to, well, why do we need to fill that gap? You know, we're going to learn anything new from this. Is this just going to be, you know, the 51st study that's going to confirm some well-known thing in our field here? So not just what's the new knowledge, but also why that new knowledge matters to an intellectual question. And we'll talk more about that. And then the question of how are we going to know that whatever conclusions you intend to draw are going to be valid? That's going to depend on whatever the disciplinary norms are for your particular field here, but how are we going to be confident that you are proposing the appropriate methods to answer the question that you want to do, so that we can have confidence that whatever it is that you end up producing as a result of the research that you're done is going to stand up to the requirements, the expectations of your particular field here. So these are just some basic questions that that you can expect in addition to whatever specific criteria a funding opportunity has that a reviewer should be able to answer after they've read your proposal here. This is another more general point, but I think it's worth emphasizing because I do see this with the students that I work with sometimes, where there's sometimes an initial mismatch between what you're writing and maybe what you should be focusing on, because the different opportunities that you're applying for, whether it be an internal program like a Spark grant here, or something that's coming from outside the university, which I help students with, all of those have different purposes. And understanding what that mission is going to be really important. If one funder is really interested in, you know, policy implications, you know, you're going to approach that a little different than one that might be a fellowship opportunity from a disciplinary association that might just be interested in what's the contribution to our particular field, or what's the way in which this is advancing basic knowledge, you know, within the social sciences, for example. So understanding what are the priorities, you know, some opportunities are really interdisciplinary. Some funders like ACLS, they're really interested in interdisciplinary work. And so, you know, you might want to be emphasizing the interdisciplinary dimensions of your work as a result of that particular priority. Others are going to be more specialized on maybe within a particular field here. That's where it's important to have some sense of who might be reviewing it, because that's going to determine how you're going to try to write your proposal here. And I always recommend trying to write it in a way that is substantial enough for specialists, but accessible to somebody who's a little bit further away. So, you know, you want the person who's an absolute expert in your field to be able to recognize why a particular project is going to be an important contribution, but you also should be able to write it in a way that somebody in perhaps an adjoining discipline or a little bit further removed, or at least who's not a specialist in your subfield, can still appreciate what the contribution is going to be. Because even if it is a situation where it's going to be read by just a discipline-specific panel, that audience is likely not going to be familiar with your specific project, or, you know, they may be in a slightly different approach. You know, there are different you know, methodologies that are employed within disciplines. There are different areas of focus, and you would really want to make sure that whoever might be reading the proposal can appreciate it there. And that's really something that relates to the question of jargon, which is, again, also a relative term. You know, what's jargon in one situation, it might just be common language that everybody understands in another. But I think one useful way that I recently came across in Leonard Cassuto's new book on academic writing is to think about this, is thinking about jargon is really helping define who is the audience and who is able to understand something, in terms of what's the in group and what's the out group. Who is part of the conversation and is an assumed sort of member who gets to participate in that. Again, in many contexts, jargon is really useful because it's a shorthand that everybody understands and then allows you to sort of progress more quickly by invoking a certain concept or idea that's well known. But the danger is that if you use something that somebody doesn't understand, you've sort of excluded them from the rest of the proposal. And so think about who that in-group is, and make sure you're not excluding inadvertently people who you actually want to be part of that group, who want to understand your proposal because they might have a stake in doing that. And so that's, again, a place where it's really important to understand at least a little bit about how the review process is going to work for the funding opportunity that you're looking at. I'll say a little bit more in a minute about some ways you might choose to structure a proposal in terms of the outline, but I'll just flag that there are differences in what this looks like. There's not any universal format. There are different expectations for this. Something like a National Science Foundation doctoral dissertation research improvement grant might be a 10-page proposal. ACLS's Dissertation Innovation Fellowship is a 7-page proposal. Winter Grant has 5 different essays that are like 1,000 words long that kind of correspond to different sections. That's something for anthropologists. So there's a lot of variation in terms of what you might actually be expected to write. A Fulbright research grant is 2 pages, single space. Regardless of whether you're looking at something that might be, 1,000 words or 10 pages, there are things that translate across all of those types of proposals here. And I think that the things we're going to look at here are things that you can apply and translate to them. But just be aware that what that's going to look like is very different. When we talk about a literature review in the context of one application, that might be a paragraph. In a context of another, it might be 2.5 pages, 3 pages or something. Either way, I think the goal behind it is going to be the same, but recognize that there are going to be different expectations that you may need to adapt and rearrange to fit specific requirements. And there's not a universal order that you may end up following as part of this here as well. So as always, pay attention to those kind of details here, but recognize that there are things that are generally transferable in terms of how you want to approach those sections, regardless of what the length might be. This here to be able to see this a little better, but one thing that I think can be helpful for approaching grant writing is recognizing that there's some general moves that you are likely to make regardless of what the requirements are here. This is something that Karen Kelsky has put together that I think applies to a lot of different, it's not working, a lot of different disciplines. And it's a way of thinking about the sort of moves that a research proposal is going to make here. And we'll talk about this in some other ways as well, but regardless of what your field is, there's a general sort of approach you want to take where there's a really kind of an hourglass shape to what a proposal looks like, where you want to start with a larger issue that would have some interest to your audience there, related to the work that's been done on that field there. And you use that to focus down to your particular research project or research question and the knowledge that you want to generate, which you then develop into the specifics of the proposed research, the methods, the study sites, the logistical details, timeline, and those sort of things there. And then you end by opening up that perspective a little bit broader again to remind people of the bigger picture implications as well. But these are some of the moves that, again, that you can kind of make as you're trying to set up that larger argument that you've done here. Another useful format that I sometimes use in other workshops is the ABT approach, which stands for and, but, therefore, which is a way of breaking down the sort of moves you want to make to set up the justification for a project where you say, here's this thing that's going on, and it's related to this other thing here, but there's this thing that we don't know, therefore we need to do this particular research. And it's a way of approaching even just a specific paragraph to really help set up a narrative about where things need to go. Because in a sense, this is a form of storytelling as well. You're trying to make a claim. There's a larger narrative about how there's a need and how your project is going to ultimately address that need by contributing knowledge that will help advance our understanding of a particular issue or question that's important to our audience and to our field here.
Could you run through that ABT one more time?
Yeah, so that's something that stands for and, but, therefore, and that's that's a way of kind of grouping things together. So the and part is like several kind of statements, maybe around a particular topic or issue. You know, it might be something around like changing migration patterns is leading to significant implications for social services in the European Union. And as a result, you know, policies have been implemented in this particular country. But, you know, the implications of this have not been fully assessed in terms of this other issue. Therefore, there's a need for research that examines it through this particular light. So it doesn't have to be sort of that mechanical in terms of use these exact words in this number of sentences, but it's a way of sort of thinking about the moves that you want to be making there, where you're setting the stage with, you know, here's some things that are going on that are important. And then the but is basically, but there's something that we don't know. However, scholars have yet to look at this particular issue. You know, in the context of studying this issue, we focus on X and Y. However, we really need to think about Z in order to truly get at whatever this issue is. Therefore, essentially, your project. We need to look at this thing here. We need a better study of that. We need to apply this particular theoretical paradigm, whatever the case might be. And that kind of sets up the justification for the project that you're looking at. But that's a good question. One way to think about what this can look like in terms of a general sort of outline here, again, this is going to vary depending on the requirements of your funder, is that it might follow something like this, where you have an introduction where you're staking out a little bit of background or context, where you're introducing whatever your larger objective research question hypothesis is there, and where you are making some claim for its larger significance, and then moving into situating that claim in existing scholarship. You know, where you're describing what the current state of the field is on a particular topic here, or maybe you're introducing a particular theoretical approach that you're going to be using while also kind of making a case for why that's going to be appropriate here. And then you may be providing some necessary background. This is really going to depend on your discipline. You know, if you're a sociologist, historian, and anthropologist, you're probably going to need to talk about the specific place that you're studying. You know, make a claim for why we need to study this particular issue, looking in this particular geographic area or this demographic or this population, historical era, et cetera, to provide enough context to kind of situate why you want to pursue these particular questions in this particular area here. Again, depending on your field, you may want to spend a little bit of time talking about any preliminary research you've done. If it's an archival-based project, you know, explaining where the sources are going to be and why you think that they're going to be the sort of materials you're going to need to answer your question here. Or if you had to do a pilot study, if you're doing more sociology or social science research, you know, maybe talking a little bit about existing data sets or materials you're going to use there. And then there's going to be some description of what the methodology is going to look like. What's the research actually going to consist of? Again, this is going to vary substantially depending on your field. In some fields, you know, there's an expectation that you'll have a pretty robust, highly defined section where you're describing particular research methods. Other fields, again, especially on the much more humanistic side of things here, you know, that methodology might be something like, I'm going to do a close reading of these particular sources with a focus on, you know, these key themes or through this particular theoretical approach. So that's going to vary as well in terms of what that's actually going to consist of in terms of the amount of space there. And then something not to overlook is that you may be expected to provide references or bibliography. That is something reviewers will pay attention to. They want to know you're citing the right literature, that it's up to date, that you know what's going on in your field, that you're not overlooking key studies or key thinkers that would really be influential, important to know for your particular proposal here. Again, there's a lot of variation in terms of what this might look like. The key point that I would want to emphasize here is that you don't want the reader to be thinking about structure. And by that, I mean, you don't want them to be distracted about why are we talking about this now? I don't understand sort of what the big picture significance is. And as a result, they are distracted from thinking about the substance of your arguments and what you're trying to do there. So if they're thinking about the structure, if they're wondering, wait, why are we looking at X and Y? When I really wish we understood a little bit more about this other thing, then they're not really focusing their attention on the content that you want there. So the goal is always to provide the reviewer with what they need when they need it. That whatever you're providing in the opening paragraphs of the application or setting them up for whatever is going to come next, so that by the time they get into those specific details about these are the novels I'm looking at, this is where I'm doing my field work, this is the historical period I'm focusing on, there is already some buy-in and an understanding about why you would want to do that thing there. So that's a little bit about thinking about the outline and the shape of what a proposal can look like here. I want to focus on what I like to call the conceptual geometry of a proposal, which is thinking about how the different parts that I just mentioned fit together logically. This is not necessarily the same thing as an outline. This is not, necessarily the way you're going to structure it in terms of how the paragraphs or sections appear sequentially, but it's more thinking about how do the different parts relate to each other. And so, feel free to come together, see the workshop here. And so, one of the key things, and we'll talk more about the research question here next, is trying to show that what it is you're trying to investigate, the core question or issue that's really motivating the project, is something that's arising naturally from a few different factors. From the existing scholarship on that topic, from potentially some preliminary research that you've done that may indicate why this is a promising issue, or why you think a certain relationship might be emerging from the data there, or why this is a natural question to emerge from the particular thing that you want to study, the case study, the examples, the fieldwork site here as well. The goal is to show that the central question or motivation for the project is something that is arising from previous work that is then going to build on it and take it in new, interesting directions. Basically showing that there is both a theoretical and an empirical foundation that you're going to be building off of here as well. That there's both data sources, materials that are available that will help lead you to this particular question, and that there is a scholarly conversation. The theoretical concepts there that are related to it here. And then after you've shown how that question is something that is emerging naturally from those sort of factors there, you then want to be showing how what it is that you're proposing to do is something that's naturally going to come out of answering that particular question there. That you've proposed the right way of getting at that. And not only do you have an interesting question, but the way you want to be able to answer that is the way that's going to give us confidence in those sort of results there. And that's where we're thinking about the research design. Because it's possible to have really interesting questions, but then maybe not have a clear sense of the best way to be able to answer that. Or the materials that maybe you want to use may not be able to really provide the type of insight you hope for, or you need to really make a case for why you think that we're going to be able to get the sort of insights and conclusions from the source materials or data points that you're generating to be able to do this here as well. So again, this is just thinking about the logical relationships, about how those different pieces should be informing each other, how existing scholarship, preliminary data, your particular location for research, if that's something that's relevant there, is leading you to that research question, which in turn is going to lead you to the right sort of methods and research design that will then help you answer that question here as well. So we'll come back to all these different parts here. But again, thinking big picture, this is sort of how the argument needs to be made. Again, not necessarily in the sequence in the same way there, but you want to be thinking about how that literature review, when we talk about that, is informing the research question, how that research question is going to relate to the methodology here. Because again, big picture, the proposal is an argument. And you need to think about how each part of this is helping advance that larger argument, and recognizing the work that each part is trying to do is going to help you make a focused, cohesive, and persuasive proposal. So I want to talk a little bit about I dare click on this. Move things here. Apparently the batteries are dying. I want to talk a little bit about how the research question can be approached here, because I think sometimes this can be the most challenging part, especially in fields that aren't hypothesis driven. Humanities fields, some social science research as well here. And so it doesn't have to be a question. I think it can be useful if you can actually formulate what you want with an actual question mark there. Because sometimes there can be a little bit of slippage and vagueness around, I'm going to explore thing. Well, that's not really a research question. What is that actually going to look like here? But I do want to spend a little time thinking about how we can generate this, what this is going to look like here. But really, this is the sort of the central purpose behind the proposal, the big thing that you're really trying to get at, the thing you want to understand, the question you want to answer, the objective you want to achieve, that everything else kind of hangs around, which is what I was trying to illustrate with the diagram on the previous slide. How everything is either leading into its formulation or naturally flowing out from it in terms of how we're going to be able to address it here. And so a couple features that it's easier for me to list them than it is to actually operationalize, but it's still important to keep in mind. You want this to be something that's clear. You want someone to be able to say, yes, the big purpose of this proposal is this, that there is some sort of clear unifying theme to tie it all together here. One of the challenges with a lot of research, again, particularly in humanities disciplines, is that we're dealing with a lot of rich materials that could be interpreted in many different ways. In interpretive disciplines, there's always another way that you could potentially use the same sort of source material here. There's lots of interesting directions that you may choose to explore. There's a lot of really rich things that can be done with those materials. The downside there is that it can be difficult to sort of make it into a focused, cohesive proposal. And so one thing to keep in mind, if you're in one of those kind of fields there, is that a proposal is not really the place where you need to bring up every single interesting thing that you might want to do or that you may end up ultimately doing, with your dissertation here. You want a little bit of thematic focus here. And it's going to be less compelling if you say, here are 8 things that I'm interested in, than to say, this is sort of the overarching area of focus. And maybe that is leading me to in turn focus on 3 related themes that kind of flow out from that there. So a proposal isn't every single thing that you may end up doing or every direction the research may end up taking. It's trying to show a cohesive, focused argument here. And so you do want it to be clear. You do want it to be focused there. And obviously, it needs to be something that's researchable. There are lots of really interesting questions that we could think about that you may never be able to really explore in a way that would meet the disciplinary standards of our particular fields here. And ideally, it's something that has some relevance beyond your discipline. Because the larger implications is something that even funders in specific disciplines are interested about. National Science Foundation cares about broader impacts. A lot of organizations might have interest in public-facing scholarship or policy-relevant work or interdisciplinary work. And so even if it is for a relatively specialized audience, it's not going to hurt to be able to show that this is something that has larger resonance. A lot of disciplines are always grappling with this question of how do we show our contribution to society at large? And so if you're able to flag that in some way, that's always going to be a useful thing. So significance can also look like a lot of things as well. And so again, I know that sometimes it can be challenging to think about, what is the significance? What's the contribution? What makes my research, really something that is of note? And the point is not that you need to emphasize every single one of these dimensions here, but here's a list of some different ways in which a project can be significant. And the challenge that I would give to all of you is to think about which ones are most relevant to the projects that you're working on. And this is also going to be a question that's going to be relevant to the particular opportunity. Because if a funder is really interested in applications of research or sort of public-facing side of things there, then things that are more implications-based or recommendation-based or practice-based, those are the sort of things you might choose to focus on in your project. Again, every project I think has potential ways in which it can touch on all of these different things here, but it's not going to be to the same degree. There may be areas where what you're doing is going to be stronger. And you really want to emphasize the things that you think are strongest in your proposal, and you really want to emphasize the forms of significance that are going to be most relevant to your particular audience here. But again, these are all different ways in which you can think about it. And so I would encourage you just to think big picture about how you would think about your particular research in relationship to all of these here. How is it making a contribution to the literature? What are the empirical contributions that are making here? Are you employing a novel methodology? Or, are you perhaps revising a certain theoretical framework? Or are you taking something that maybe has been really well used in one context and you're saying, hey, this could be relevant over here in another one. Or maybe you're taking a well-established method, but you're focusing it on a particular theme or corpus of texts or sources or interview subjects or whomever it might be the case for your project there that hasn't been engaged with that particular methodology. So lots of different ways that you could be thinking about this here. And again, if you're struggling to think about, okay, what's the big picture significance, I would encourage you to think through some of these things and say, what is it that's distinct about my particular subject focus here? The people, the site, the text, the period that I'm studying. What's the ways in which this work is doing something interesting with the existing literature, et cetera, with all of this here. Again, you don't want to try to make the claim that your work is equally speaking to every one of these sort of things here. That's just going to be too diffusive in terms of your attention, but you do want to be able to think about which ones are going to be most important to your particular funding opportunity. And again, if you're a little bit stuck, this will hopefully help you think maybe in some different lights about how your work has value to a variety of different audiences. Again, if you're also trying to struggle to come up with a good research question or to really narrow that focus there, I want to take a couple minutes and talk through an exercise from Raphael Folsom's book, How to Get Grant Money in the Humanities and Social Sciences, that I think can be really helpful. He recommends thinking of a few works that are really influential in your field or in your particular project here, and to try to find a way to state what you see the main question that work is answering. And that I think can be actually a kind of challenging thing to do. Because again, a lot of times the projects we're working on, the subjects we're working on, the literature we're engaging is dealing with a lot of really rich, sophisticated material, with a lot of different themes and arguments that may be part of that. But if you can sort of think big picture, what's the larger question that all these other questions or themes or analysis really is related to, that can give you the sort of clarity that can really be helpful in thinking about what might be the case for your particular project. And so I've put together just two examples that I like to use as a way to think about this here. These are just my takes on it. So if you've read either of the works that I'm going to flag here and have a different one, that's great. I'm not suggesting this is the definitive answer to any of these things here, but a way to sort of think about what is the larger question that motivates it there. So just one example from literary theory, CN9s are aesthetic categories. My take for this book: how the conditions of late capitalism shape the categories of aesthetic experience. Other readers might formulate this differently or choose to focus on other things there, but I think that is one way to think about the particular categories that this scholar examines, how all of the things in that particular book kind of hang together. Doesn't matter if you read this or not, that's not important. But the idea is to try to find a way to focus it in on a larger question that motivates it. To use another example from my field, which is Russian history, Faith Hillis's Utopia's Discontents. It's a book that focuses on Russian radical thinkers and emigre communities throughout Europe, mostly in the 19th century, and how the practices of daily life in those communities, she argues, helped shape their thoughts and ultimately helped influence the direction of Russian and Soviet history. And my attempt to try to put all of that together in this book that tells with a lot of interesting things, with a lot of different sources and case studies there, is to say, how did the experiences and practices of living in emigre communities affect the development of Russian radical thoughts, affect thinkers who were key in these sort of intellectual traditions here. So again, this is an exercise that I would encourage you to engage in to think about how you can take the kind of projects and the research that you're working with and try to find a way to tie it all together here. And again, if you're trying to come up with a project, if you're still trying to think about, I don't know exactly what I want to do, I'm interested maybe in certain topics or ideas, or a certain theory here, this can be a way, by identifying some of the things in the works that have been influential in your field, that can maybe help lead you to some new directions there. Because something else that you can always do is think about how you might adapt or change that sort of central question. Would you modify the question in any way? This scholar is maybe focusing it here. Would you maybe challenge the premise or maybe reframe it? Maybe that question was asked specifically about Central America in the 19th century. Does it also apply to Southeast Asia in the second half of the 20th century? Can you maybe translate it to a different time period or a different location? Do we maybe want to employ a different category? Maybe this scholar has focused on it through one particular lens, but we need to argue that it could be done with a focus on this other thing here. Or again, maybe the scope could be expanded or could be focused in more precisely, depending on what the case is there. So these are just some ways to help do a little bit of brainstorming if you're trying to think of a question, or if you're trying to think about how to bring together some of the themes that you might be working on in a way that can be cohesive here as well. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to have us, break out and really do this in depth now, but I would encourage you to engage in that exercise if you're feeling a little stuck on this issue, because I think this can be one of the hardest parts, especially in humanities disciplines, is figuring out what that central research question is. If you're not doing work that's explicitly kind of hypothesis driven, or where there's a clear objective, just as a normal feature of your discipline here. Before we jump into the second half there, I just want to pause and ask if there are questions about these big picture issues around significance, around the overall argument, around conceptual geometry, around research questions, before we start thinking about what this means in the context of the specific sections of our proposal.
Yeah, a little too in the weeds, and maybe not right for this kind of form, but one of the, as I was thinking through, what I want to brainstorm in or research, it'd be something along the lines of, why don't we know that? Which, when I think about it, is, oh gosh, that's not a research question. That's just pointing to a gap. But then as I think through it, there is something about barriers to.
Yeah, so I think that the move then is to kind of interrogate that a little bit more and think about, what is the reason that we don't know something? Is it because it's been undervalued? Is it because maybe, as you're suggesting, that there are barriers to it, that there are perhaps interested parties who would prefer it not be known, or, those are things that might potentially lead you to something there as well. That depending on, what your goals are, or depending on if it's a fellowship opportunity, what a proposal focuses on, could be something that's really interesting. So I think that the thing we're thinking about a gap is that that's necessary, but it's not sufficient. So yes, you need to show that this is something that we don't know, but then the next step is, why is that important? And so it's not a bad thing to just start from there and say, hey, there's something that we don't know. But then that's really the point, to kind of start getting a little bit curious and probing that a little bit more, because then that might lead you to something really interesting about why it's really important that we know that, or maybe, as you're suggesting here, why the fact that we don't know that might lead us in a certain direction there as well. And maybe the project is less about how do we know X and Y, and more about how do we create the conditions under which it is knowable or something. So, there are looking a lot of interesting directions you could do with something like that.
Thank you. Yeah.
Other questions, comments here before we jump ahead with anything?
I'm more concerned about the whole structure. Was showing when I came and those the fundamental components. Writing proposal.
Yeah, what about it specifically?
Like the structure, I called it the geometry the writing of yeah. I'm asking what are those are the fundamental components that if you take one from there, you cannot have it as a cannot write a proposal for
Yeah, so that's actually,
or some of them are embedded, somehow into another.
yeah, so that was about thinking about what the logical relationship is between those parts there. And then what we're going to look at here soon is the parts that are sort of necessary for every project. And so having some sort of significance section, introduction, having a literature review, having some kind of background, and then having a work plan or methodology, those are the parts that basically every project is going to require. But then what I was saying a little before that, before you came in, is that that's going to look different depending on each proposal. Because the amount of space you have for it, or the requirements of a particular funder, you might structure it a little bit differently there. But that was where the point about the conceptual geometry was, is that recognizing what that piece does within the larger argument that you're trying to make. And so regardless of where you place, that literature review, maybe it's this, maybe one funder has you follow a particular order here, another funder has you put it somewhere else there. the thing that you're trying to do is to show, as we'll get to in a minute here, how that literature is helping to inform the question that you're asking. Or, how the methodology, the method you're employing, or the plan for the research is going to help you arrive at data and conclusions that will help answer the question that you're posing. So it's thinking about how those pieces work together to achieve that larger argument that you're making, but recognizing that they're not necessarily going to always be organized in the exact same way. But regardless, you can still try to remember what you're trying to accomplish with that particular section. Is that helpful? Sure. Okay. All right, well, again, if there are other questions, please feel free to jump in as well. But the next thing I want to do at the second half here is to try to make this a little bit more concrete and think about what this looks like in the context of the particular sections of proposals. And here we're also going to draw in a few examples to hopefully give you a way of visualizing what this can look like in several different disciplines, several different funders here. So introductions are important spaces. There are different ways to approach doing this, but I really encourage you to think of that introduction, whether that's a page or a paragraph, as really sort of a proposal in miniature, an abstract in some ways as well, where you're basically going to be previewing the moves that the rest of the proposal is going to elaborate on in greater detail of all the key features of what's going on here. You want to do something that's going to get buy-in from the reader. That could be an interesting anecdote, or maybe some sort of a perplexing paradox, or maybe just drawing attention to a particular issue or an intellectual debate. Different ways of doing that. But then you also want to identify a significant problem, a problem which is the knowledge gap with stakes, something that we don't know, and it matters that we don't know it. And then that's going to lead us to the particular question that's ultimately going to motivate the research, because then the objective of the proposal is going to be answering that question, figuring out, achieving that particular objective, and doing a little bit of foreshadowing of the solution. The solution is going to be the research you're proposing. So giving a little bit of an indication of the methods and its potential contribution here. So again, you're not going to be fleshing this out in great detail, because the rest of the proposal is where you're going to provide additional evidence. This is generally not the place where you're going to have a bunch of citations and things, although you might mention one or two depending on what you're doing here. But it's really setting the stage and preparing the reader for the moves that you're about to make going forward, giving them some sense of where you see this work relating to existing scholarship, giving some sense of what the payoff is going to be and how you're going to go about achieving it here. And so one thing, to try to do, I encourage you to use that first paragraph effectively. Again, there are different ways to do this. It might be bringing up a key question or a compelling issue, or flagging a debate that would be of relevance or significance to your audience there. It could be, again, an anecdote or a story that really helps illustrate something, or helps, make clear a particular issue or challenge that maybe is indicative of the larger question that's motivating your research here. But when you think about that, if you do want to open with sort of an anecdote or a story, or maybe an incident from your sources, or from a text that you're using there, the goal is not just to pique the reader's interest in terms of having something sort of compelling and interesting there, but it should also do something that makes the reviewer recognize where it relates to existing literature here, as Raphael Fulton has in this quote here, something that will call into doubt an important set of ideas from the secondary literature. So maybe everybody assumes that X is the case, but here's an example that would really suggest Y. So not only is it maybe an interesting story that somebody will remember, but it's also something that maybe poses a paradox or challenges a set of assumptions, or maybe calls into a question, something that's related to existing scholarship here. Different ways of approaching it, but these are some things to be keeping in mind. Let's take a look at an example of a relatively specialized award here. This is from a National Science Foundation doctoral dissertation research improvement grant in the field of linguistic anthropology. So this is something that's going to be for a relatively specialized audience. So, what counts as significant, what counts as an interesting question for something like this is going to be different than the way you would start something if it's meant for like an interdisciplinary audience here as well. But I'll give you a second to look over this here, and really just want you to recognize how this writer, even for a relatively specialized opportunity, manages to gesture to some broader implications for the field, as well as some things more specific to the particular area of study. So like any dissertation project, this is a highly specialized topic. And if this writer had only placed the emphasis on how this is going to help scholars better understand this one particular linguistic community in this one particular geographic location, you know, the audience of that work is going to be pretty small. And the number of people who may be prepared to recognize its significance is going to be really limited as well. But what's interesting here is that the writer does a good job of pivoting beyond saying, this is going to help us, you know, for anybody who's interested in studying this particular society, their language, their culture, their customs, there's a contribution here, but also makes it clear about why in studying that very particular set of issues with this very specific group here, it's going to have implications that are of interest to the larger field, in this case, other linguistic anthropologists here. So, you know, that specialized focus in red text there, you know, might be interested to a certain audience there, but the larger audience that might be reading this proposal is really being addressed by that text that's in blue here that says, there are some big questions, some big theoretic questions that our field has been thinking about language use and social organization, that this work is likely to shed light on. So I use this example because even in the context of a relatively specialized award, it's still important to recognize the different audiences that are for it here. And I do think that one of the challenges when you're working on a dissertation project, when you're really getting in the weeds with the sources there, is that sometimes it can be hard to move beyond that immediate significance that you might be thinking about and think about its broader implications there. And while this would be probably much too specialized of a first paragraph for an award that was meant for, again, for a much broader or interdisciplinary audience, for this particular opportunity, it does make sense because this is something that is really going to be read by other linguistic anthropologists. So that was the first paragraph here. I want to take a look at a larger example from the same award mechanism, although this one is going to come from the field of political science, that demonstrates what I was talking about the introduction basically providing a proposal in miniature here. We're going to see how this introduction for an award that has a 10-page proposal basically has an overview that has the research question, that gives us some sense of where this question relates to existing literature, that shares a little bit about methods and plans, and talks a little bit about the implications of that particular work here. So I'll give you a second to look at this. This is a proposal in political science. Again, the specifics of the research in terms of its relevance and your background for that isn't what's important here. What's important is recognizing how this author does those particular things. So I'll give you a chance to read it here, and then I'll highlight some areas where we see those features being identified.
Right.
Great. This one is really nice because it starts off exactly with the question. So that's, you know, we're cutting right to the chase here, which is not, you know, a requirement, but it certainly doesn't make it ambiguous what's sort of driving the proposal here. let's break this down a little bit here. I really like this example. Like I keep going back and forth about, oh, should I bring in a different one? But I still keep coming back to this particular proposal because I think it does a really good job of really maintaining that grants mindset, that argumentative momentum to it here as well, and being very clear about a number of key features. So I will flag, this is a proposal that was awarded 15 years ago. So, the stakes may have changed here, the literature may have moved on, but at least at the time of its writing, this is sort of the argument, at least was what the state of the field on this particular issue was here. But going to thinking about the things that we're looking at here, what I've highlighted in red are the key research questions that are motivating this proposal. Again, this one starts off directly with a question. That's one way to really make sure that the larger intellectual motivation of the project is clear. You don't necessarily have to do that, but in this case, this issue about how do governments provide public services in conditions of scarcity, essentially, that's something that is a larger issue here. And the first paragraph really kind of unpacks why this is something that scholars of the developing world are really focusing on there. And then I highlighted the first sentence of the second paragraph as well, because that's where we see this scholar showing how this research is going to be connected to a particular area. So there's this big picture question about public services in conditions of scarcity. And we're going to focus on answering this and trying to understand this by looking at electricity in northern India over the past 2 decades, basically. So we have this big picture question for the field, and then we also have some indication about where we're going to be trying to answer something or learn something around this larger issue by focusing on this particular service in this particular location here. The next thing I want to hide, and this, I apologize, is a little hard to see probably with this light, some text in blue is where we see some references to the literature, where these claims are being backed up. Again, not in a full detailed literature review. If you look at the rest of this proposal, there are a couple pages actually where specific scholars are engaged in greater detail. But we see in some broad argumentative strokes what's been going on here to help give some sense about where this work is being situated in the literature. And so, it says there's a long theoretical tradition talking about the values of democracy for development. However, there are questions about how effectively democracies can provide these services, especially in certain contexts where electoral politics have certain challenges that are part of that there. It says scholars continue to disagree on whether competitive elections are associated with better services for the poor. So it clearly identifies some existing debates in scholarship that these questions are related to. This isn't just a random question that's been pulled out of thin air. This is something that is of significance to scholars who are interested in this field here. And then a couple sentences down towards the very bottom, we also see another reference here as well that's a little bit more specialized to the particular focus on studying India. It says, my study goes well beyond this claim that is already kind of well established in literature. So that's a smart move for a couple of reasons. One, it indicates that the state of the field. Two, it maybe heads off a potential objection that somebody might say, saying, oh, well, maybe there's a well-established body of literature that's already been thinking about these kind of questions here. And our writer here says, but wait, we're not just thinking about this, we're taking this a step further in a new direction. So again, not only is the writer indicating that they know where this work relates to other work here, it's being done with an argumentative focus here. It's saying there's disagreement, and clearly the implication is going to be we're going to intervene in that debate in some way. And also, that there's work that needs to be done beyond what's already been done on this particular topic. The next thing that I want to highlight in this particular example in green text is where we see a little bit about the methods that are going to be employed. So we know we have this larger question about how services are provided and basically its relationship with electoral politics. We know that it's focusing on northern India and electricity. And there's some justification for why that's the case in this particular region. But how are we actually going to answer those questions? So we get a little bit of a preview here about how this is going to be done. We're going to be drawing on satellite imagery, government data on electricity distribution, using GIS technology to look at changing patterns of these sort of things. And then also supplementing this with Oh, never mind. I think of something else here. Oh no, yes, it's and also no, never mind. I lost my thought here. But how this is going to be done, how this imagery is actually going to be employed rather in answering these particular questions here. So not just these are the methods I'm going to use, but how this is actually going to help us answer the question. By using the satellite imagery to identify the levels of provision over 2 decades at the local and state assembly levels there, then you're able to be able to answer these questions potentially. So again, this is going to be unpacked in greater detail in the section of the proposal where the methodology and the research plan is outlined, but already we're getting a sense of where this is going. And so by the time you as a reader get there, we already have some expectation that this is going to involve satellite imagery. We already have some sense of why that might be an appropriate way to try to get at some of these questions here. And then the part in purple here, the last sentence, the second to last paragraph, and then the last sentence of the final paragraph is where we see a little bit of foreshadowing about what the results of this work are and how this might be a contribution to the field here. So what's the result? It's going to be a detailed analysis of how critical public service is distributed in a democratic region with one of the highest concentrations of poverty. Okay, so that's giving us some sense about why this is important. And then also we have a little bit of what might be the payoff here as well in terms of using these methods. It will allow us to quantify the influence politicians have on delivering basic service here, who is most effective in doing this, and the kind of effects of these can have on electoral politics there. So something that's a little bit more specific to the particular questions flagged in the very beginning about this relationship between competitive elections and the quality of public services here. So just to pull that all together, we can see in the course of this is, a page, half a page here of introduction, we get the kind of the proposal in miniature. We get a sense of the larger argument that's going to be built here. We get some sense of the stakes and why this work might be important. So I think this is a good example of how you can structure an introduction in a way that really helps prepare the reader for the much more detailed, the more technical description that's going to follow for this particular award here. This is going to look very different for other awards that are not as specialized or that have smaller amounts of text that you're able to provide for it here. But even if you're doing this in the span of just one paragraph, you can still kind of flag these sort of things here. And again, the question here is really about the moves that you're trying to make in establishing the significance of what you're doing and indicating how you're going to go about doing those sort of things here. So that's a little bit about significance and introductions and how you might want to structure those sort of things. The next thing that I want to think about is the literature review, sometimes called a significance section as well, because really the point here is that you're trying to show why your project is going to be something that's important for your field. How is it contributing to the scholarship in your discipline here? And really, this is that knowledge gap question, the so what question. I really encourage you to think about what's both the empirical and what's the theoretical contribution or conceptual contribution of your work going to be. So how is this both going to produce new data? Potentially, either we're generating data or collecting it, or we're bringing some new sources into play here, some new texts. And in that respect, some information that is either unknown or hasn't been used in this particular way before. But then also, how is that going to contribute to how we think about these things? The conceptual theoretical frameworks that our disciplines use. How is it going to intervene in a particular debate? Is it going to take a side in a debate? Is it going to challenge something? Is it going to propose a new direction? Those are all possible options there, but it's really showing how your scholarship relates to existing work and how it's going to do something interesting and extend it in important directions there. And really, this is also a place where you're trying to explain how your very particular specialized question relates to the larger field here. So again, you're kind of funneling attention here. You're starting with some of these bigger issues and you're moving down to something a little bit more precise. We saw that in that previous introduction where we started with those really big questions about resource delivery and scarcity, and we ended up with something that's going to be looking at GIS data around electricity distribution in northern India in a particular time period there. But if you set it up well, then it seems very logical that we end up in that ultimate place there. And so that's what you want to be showing as well, why whatever the bigger picture debates or issues or themes or directions in your field are, you want to show how whatever you're proposing is a natural step for your field in that direction here. Something that's really important to keep in mind is that your literature review is part of your arguments. This is one of the places where I think as graduate students, it can be easy to get led astray a little bit here, because this is not a comprehensive exam. This is not necessarily the place, it's not the place, and you're not going to have the space to try to show every single thing that you've read. And I think sometimes this can be a little bit of a challenge where you might feel like, oh, well, I need to show, like, mention this scholar, I need to show the reviewer that I understand this particular scholar's concept here. And if they don't understand, really recognize that I understand Bourdieu's concept of practice, and they're going to think that I'm not intelligent enough and I can't carry this out. I think that's a natural impulse. I certainly felt that when I was working on these sort of things. But here again, the point is not that you are showing that you have a firm, command of this particular scholar's theory, unless your work is really just focused on one or two key thinkers here. This is really about more of a field level view where you're saying this is the direction of scholarship, this is where it needs to go. And I like, again, this idea from Leonard Cassuto to describe the literature review as a story of how the works of others helped you arrive at your own idea. Again, so there's a purpose behind what you're trying to achieve here. In most cases, this is not going to be focused on maybe just one particular scholar. You might say scholars such as so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so have focused on this. Or in some cases, maybe there's one person who's sort of the path-breaking figure, or, maybe you're doing a close reading of one particular scholar's oeuvre, like that's fine. But the point is not that you're taking sort of a work-by-work analysis to show that you understand these things there. You're providing more of a high-level synthesis in a way that shows how your work has been informed and builds off of and does interesting, significant things with that. And again, this is also where it's not just about saying there's a gap in the literature, it's about saying that this gap is actually an analytical problem. That there's a conceptual problem, that because we haven't done this, we're therefore not able to do some other thing that's important for intellectual reasons in our field here. And we already talked a little bit about jargon, but again, this is another place where you want to be writing this in a way that's accessible for people who may not be intimately familiar with every work or with the contours of your particular scholarly debates that you want to be working on in your subfield or specialization. Here's an example, and we'll return to the first half of this paragraph actually a little bit later, from the field of comparative literature for a Fulbright Award for Brazil. And I chose this because Fulbright Awards research proposals are really short. They're 2 pages, single spaced. And so I want to show that you can reference literature in a way that is very focused and still sort of build that kind of argument here. And that when you don't have 10 pages, you can still actually bring some things into play that kind of makes that case for this. And so in this case, this is a project that is in comparative literature that's looking at Black diaspora literature, putting in conversation Afro-Brazilian works with African-American literature. And it mentions, it stakes out the particular texts that are going to be done here, and it makes a case for why some additional work needs to be done. It mentions that, there has been English language scholarship on this subject, flags a few works there, but notes that they don't examine any of the Portuguese language texts here. So, all right, that's not just showing you have knowledge of existing literature, it's showing, there's something that needs to be done. That this existing scholarship has neglected a potentially relevant body of sources here that we might want to be examining here. And that's exactly what this proposal does. My work is we'll build on these publications and we'll incorporate Portuguese language text in the analysis, and we'll begin basically to put into conversation these Afro-Brazilian and African-American literatures that are part of the larger African diaspora in the Western Hemisphere here. And also intervening in this understanding of U.S. perceptions of Brazil. So here again is just a couple of sentences in a relatively short research proposal that still manages to identify a body of literature, still manages to identify an area where there's need for more research and to make a case for it here. So whether you have a paragraph to do this in or whether you have several pages, you still want to be thinking about that kind of argument here. This isn't just a list of, and these are sources that are about this particular topic. It's making a claim about what those sources have focused on and what they haven't focused on and when there's need for additional research. So that's an example of thinking about literature review. I want to touch on sections for works that might involve archival research or field work or data collection in different locations here. That's a section that may or may not be relevant, again, depending on your project. But if it is, this is the place where you're basically making the arguments for the source base that you're going to be using. So if the literature review is where you're making the argument for the theoretical contribution that your work is going to make, this is the section where you're explaining why the particular materials you're going to be using are going to be important. Why is this the right place to be looking at? Why are the materials we're going to gather here, the data we're going to generate here, going to be important to answering our question? Why this particular setting or these materials matter, how to justify the source base that we end up employing here as part of this. So again, think about this as the empirical counterpoint to the literature review. So here's an example for a social science project here. This is from the Russell Sage Foundation dissertation grants that focuses on social science research related to specific themes in U.S. society that the foundation chooses to invest in here. This is from a funded project that was looking at social networks around pretrial bail. I'll give you a second to look over this, but again, the purpose is not that you have to be intimately familiar with the research questions that we imposed here, but more pay attention to how this author is building a case for why where they have chosen to study their particular questions is the right place to be able to do that. Let's think about how this particular example really makes an argument. This isn't just a dry description of I'm going to Harris County and I'm going to talk with people at these particular bail agencies there. This writer makes a consistent argument really through every sentence about why this is important and why this is the right place to do that. And does a couple of interesting things. They preview their methodology, how they're actually going to engage in generating data in these locations there. They provide some justification for that research design, why this is the right way to do this there, and some justification for why the place they're choosing to pursue these questions is the right way to do that. And so I've highlighted that text in some different colors here. We can see that. So again, we have in blue here a little bit about the methods to be employed, ethnographic data collection, in-depth interviews, already indicating the number of study subjects, a little bit about how we're going to recruit those participants there. So we get some sense about what this research is actually going to look like. So this is really sort of a little bit of a research plan in some ways as well. And then the text that I have highlighted in green is where we see some justification for these particular research choices here. Not just I'm going to go to bail bond agencies, but owned by people of particular backgrounds, at different scales of operation, but explaining why this is important, why this is actually a really interesting space for the types of questions that we're trying to understand here, because of the type of interactions it facilitates and how they're going to offer insight into the type of operations that are going to be really important to what's going on here. So again, it's not just this is what I'm doing, this is what my site looks like. Background here, this is why this is the right site for doing this here. And the same thing for the larger location in general. That whole second paragraph is really all about why Harris County, Texas is the place to try to do this. And makes a number of points about why this is the case here, about its demographics, about the larger legal structure in place within the state of Texas, about its prominence at the time, at least of this proposal, and some national conversations around bail reform. So this is not just, I'm going to Harris County, Texas, to spend a year gathering data. This is really an ideal place to do so for all of these reasons here. And so you read this, and I think even, if you're not in a field where you may be able to immediately appreciate what this work is trying to do, you can still come away with a strong sense of why this would be a great location to try to pursue these sort of things here. And so if you are going to be describing, a location for your work, you want to be doing something similar. You want to be making that case, not just that, these are the materials I want to examine, but these are the right materials for my project, and these are the right places to be able to access them. That's going to look different. It might be a couple sentences depending on your project. It might be something more robust, like a couple paragraphs for this particular one here. But again, this is about justifying your choices and building that kind of argument, and not just listing what it is, where it is you're going to be going, or the materials you're going to be using, as if it's self-evident why that's important. I just want to briefly make a couple comments about preliminary research, and then we'll move on to the last section, which is methodology, which is, if you have done any sort of research prior to whatever it is that you're hoping to accomplish with this funding here, this is really the purpose of being able to do that, is really to show your preparation. So think about this in terms of making sure that you're demonstrating that you have whatever it takes to be able to carry out what it is that you want to do. In some cases, this might be, you might want to be flagging in the proposal your preparation for something here as well, if there's any question about what that might be the case. So, if you're planning to use some statistical methods, that you have the right methodology training. If you're going to be doing field work in another country, do you have the necessary language skills to carry that out? Or, do you have the connections in place to be able to get access to the materials that you need to, or those sort of things there. This is also a place where you're trying to justify why you think that you're likely to find the sort of materials you're going to need. So again, if there's preliminary research that you've done, maybe you did some exploratory research over a shorter trip. Maybe you want to gesture to the work of other scholars who have shown, the type of materials that are available in a particular archive or institution. Any preliminary hypotheses based on pilot data or the secondary literature that you can point to. The point of this is, again, just to show that you're prepared for the research, and that there's some reason to suspect that the things you want to do are promising. Again, you don't want to come in and say you know exactly what you're going to find, because this is research you still haven't done yet. You don't want to come across as if you've already made up your mind about what you're going to find, because your theoretical commitments or analytical approach basically dictates what the results have to be. You don't want that, but you want to show that you have proper reason to think that this is likely to be something that's going to pay off. So that's something, again, if you've done preliminary research, you can incorporate that. That may or may not be a separate section. That may just be something, this kind of information that you weave into other parts of it, particularly into that methodology or that work plan section, which is the last thing that I want us to focus on here. This is, again, going to vary. I mentioned this before, the length, the amount of detail for this can vary substantially. For some fields, there's going to be a lot of space on this. For others, it might be a couple sentences or a paragraph. The point here that I want to emphasize for all of this is that throughout, you really want to be explaining why you're doing the things that you're doing. Again, the same thing with the site location. It's not just about listing what it is that's going on or providing details about it. There, you need to be providing justification and rationale behind it. And so it's really important to connect that what and why. What are you doing and why is it important? Why is conducting semi-structured interviews with 15 participants the right way to answer the question that you're posing here? And then the what part is, what are you actually going to be doing? If you get this money to carry on research or whatever the purpose is, it's a writing fellowship, then you're going to be writing. What specifically you're going to be doing? I'm going to be drafting chapters 1 and 2 in the first 2 months, and I will be, finishing up this additional piece of research and completing the literature review by whatever. Like the details about the steps you're going to take, whether that's in the field or whatever the research is for there. Information, again, if this is about research or data collection, how you're actually going to be interpreting that data, the time frame here, any resources that may be important for this. Again, this is where you might want to flag particular research skills, tools that you may be using, language training, specialized techniques or things there. Any sort of connections that might be necessary. Again, if you're doing field work in a location, do you need permission from someone to access certain materials? Do you have existing relationships with organizations you want to work with, or people who can help connect you with potential research subjects? All those sort of things that are going to help justify the feasibility of that project to show that you can actually carry it out if you get the funding for whatever this research is here. So what are the things that you have going on with that? And then again, related to that is the why piece. Yeah, question here.
So the one plane has to automatically fill in the methodology, or you have to create a subsection in the methodology?
That kind of depends on what the requirements are. It might be that you're largely just kind of describing the methods there. Depending on your field, though, there may be sort of established methodologies. I will do this sort of analysis, or I will run this type of test there. So that might be a separate section where you kind of, or a paragraph or whatever, where you kind of describe these are the methods. And then the work plan might just be where you describe in more detail, what that actually looks like. We will run this particular experiment.
Is it like a timeline in terms of the work plan?
I would
Isn't that when you would do each of that's a section of the research? So
that is often a good place to be able to address that. That again kind of depends. There are some awards where that's a separate document where they may have a timeline. But even if that is a separate document, I think it's always helpful to gesture to, even in broad strokes, and say, if this is funding for 6 months, in the first 2 months, I will complete the data collection. The second month, I will be cleaning the data and running the analysis here, and then I will begin drafting preliminary results or something. So depending on your field, the method might be a separate section where you're explaining that sort of framework or experimental technique that you might be using. And then you might have a separate section where you're describing in more detail what that actually looks like in terms of step by step. In other fields, that might kind of go all together. But it is important to make sure that both of those pieces are present. And then the other part, again, that I was mentioning is that the why is really important. That it's not, you don't want to assume that it's self-evidently obvious that doing X is going to be important or the right way to answer a question there. And so you want to be bringing in some of that argumentation about, why this is the right way to answer the question that you're posing here. And again, the big picture goal for this section is really about the feasibility. So if the literature review is really about the significance and the contribution potentially, and some of those other sections are about, empirically what it is you're hoping to find. The part of the argument that this is really serving is showing that you can actually do it here. Because you might have a really promising question that might make a really significant intervention there, but if it's just not something you can actually do, it's going to take 2 years of field work and you can only find it 6 months here, or it's going to require resources or skills that are just beyond your means at this stage of your career, then it's still not going to be that successful as a proposal. And so you do want to make sure that you're appropriately scoping things here. And so that doesn't mean that you have to kind of give up on whatever that bigger project is, but it might mean that for a particular proposal, you have to focus the scope a little bit more and say, the dissertation is going to look at these 3, locations here. This proposal is focused on one part of that. And so, we will use this 6 months to do the field work I need to do here. That's going to inform, paper 1 in the dissertation if it's a manuscript 1, or is going to inform the 2 chapters that will focus on this, and then the rest of the project will do additional research in this other location there. So this is really about the feasibility, and then again giving us confidence that the research is going to produce results that are valid here. And so I'll flag this again in an example going back to that same Fulbright one. I said we come back to this one here in terms of methods. I chose this because, again, comparative literature is a humanities field where you're not necessarily going to find the same elaborate descriptions of research design as you might expect to find in the social science field, but you still want to talk about what exactly you're going to be doing here. So again, this is a work on African-American and Afro-Brazilian literature and focusing on doing research in Brazil. And it's talking about methodologically analyzing African-American works that evoke musical performance motifs with these connections to African diaspora. And then I will be looking at these particular texts here and putting them in conversation with these Brazilian texts here. And by putting them in a comparative framework, it will be possible to then challenge these certain conceptions here. This idea of Brazil as an idealized Black utopia and global commodification of Blackness. Methodologically counterpointing these two bodies of work, we're looking at how a transnational collective consciousness forms across space, across landscape there. So this isn't just, I'm going to be reading these particular books, but it's explaining, I'm looking for these particular motifs related to music and performance and religion here. And I'm going to be looking at these particular works and reading them in conversation with these other works for the purpose of looking at these bigger themes here around diasporic consciousness, this idea of the Black imaginary. So this is going to look very different in other disciplines that are maybe more experimental. But in the context of something like comparative literature, where it might seem like the method is I'm going to read the book, well, you can still say a little bit more than that. And this, I think, is a good way of being able to do that. You know, what are you looking for when you're reading? You know, what's the takeaway? What's the theoretical approach that's going to be employed here? So that's an example of what that can look like. For those in more of a social science field, I wanted to use another example here to show a range, because I think this can really differ significantly. This is from a Wenner-Gren grant. This is a grant that's specifically for anthropology research. Its format is a little bit different. It's for a project that is a study of transnational justice initiatives focusing on Indigenous communities in Canada. And in this case, there's a larger section, and I just chose one paragraph from it here. But what's useful about this particular example is that the writer of this proposal identifies a number of organizations that they're going to be working with, a number of sources here, but does so in a way that demonstrates the feasibility of things here, and really shows how these particular research choices make sense for achieving that larger result. And so say, you know, I'm going to be collecting field notes, doing participant observation with these particular organizations, conducting informal interviews, what's going to be done with these notes, how they're going to be done here as well. Then explains how these organizations work closely with survivors and government officials here. There's overlap between these different groups. Members have all shown an interest in and agreed to participate in my research. Great. So here are some relevant organizations. I already have contacts with it. You can feel confident that if you give me this money, you know, I can actually pursue research with these particular organizations. And then they note additional archival research will include primary sources such as press releases, reports from nonprofits, some other reports and things there, to provide additional secondary support here as well. So again, recognizing that there may be other sources that will be relevant to this project and then flagging that those are going to be included here as well. So again, this is part of a larger methodology section from a Wenner-Gren grant, which actually gives you like 1,000 words to describe in more detail these sort of issues here. But whether you're doing this in 1,000 words or whether you're doing it in the span of half a paragraph, like the previous example here, in both cases, we're making claims about why these are the right decisions to be made. We're trying to demonstrate the feasibility of the work that's going to be done here. All right, so I know we're at time. I just want to briefly remind us that all of this is about understanding how these pieces are building that larger argument here. How that preliminary research, how the literature, how the case site description is providing the theoretical and the empirical justification and background for the work, how all of that is leading us to the research question, justifying the research question, and how that research question should be leading us to the methods that are best, most appropriate to answer that question, and how we're going to try to then explain how what we want to do is a feasible way of achieving all of that here. And so just to tie all of this together, big picture here, this is about making an argument, this is about establishing significance, and then focusing your specific project, and that recognizing that every part of an effective research proposal and every part of an application really, including other documents, is making an argument for it here. And that when we're thinking about generating knowledge, when we're thinking about building the case in our proposal there, it's really about connecting what and why. It's about explaining what we're doing, but also justifying that in different ways. So that it's not just a description of here's what I'm going to do with the money. It's, and this is why that's the best way to do it. The way to answer the questions here, the way to advance the literature, the way to achieve the goal that I've set out for myself here as part of this. So I will send these slides to everyone here as well. I'll pause for questions. I know people may need to leave here at the end. I'll just flag too that I drew in a number of sources that I would recommend to all of you, and I can recommend some additional ones beyond this too in some cases that went into putting together this. And I'm always happy to talk with any of you individually about the projects that you're working on, because again, a lot of this is going to be relatively discipline specific here. So let me stop screen sharing here and I'll stop the recording. And it looks like we've got a question in the chat. Oh, was I not recording? Yes.